Hello and welcome to this roundtable discussion as part of Restaurant and Bar Design Week. I'm Harry McKinley and I'm going to be asking, is maximalism the new minimalism? Today, I'm joined by Anamika Putalia, Editor-in-Charge of Living Etc. India, Des Gunawardena, CEO of D&D London, and Julian Albertini and Alina Pimkina, the Principals of Aesthetique. Now, before we dive into conversation, let's frame the question. Just a few years ago, if one described an interior as contemporary, we all knew what that meant. Clean lines, austere furnishings, lots of white. But in recent times, our sense of what constitutes desirable design has seemingly been shifting. Certainly in the likes of Western Europe, there's been a growing appetite for boldness and eccentricity in hospitality spaces. The restaurants, bars and hotels that now arguably capture the attention of consumers most are those that have something to say, loudly. So, is this a momentary trend and is our interest in all things audacious set to pass, or is minimalism really fading away to be replaced by something altogether more flamboyant? As always, I'd like to start by getting the lay of the land. So, speakers answering just yes or no, is maximalism the new minimalism?
I want to say yes and no.
No.
Alina?
I would say yes.
Julian?
I would say yes and no.
Oh, okay, so I feel as if we have a pretty comfortably mixed spread of opinions there. So design speaks to our times, and even if maximalism isn't necessarily supplanting minimalism, according to some of you, there's no doubt that it's still on the rise. What does the rise of maximalism say about today? Julian, you're quite keen on this idea that it is the new minimalism, so let's start with you on that.
Yeah, my thoughts here is that I think we've seen kind of best of both worlds as of recent. We've seen super minimalist space, especially coming out of like Belgium, etc. And then you're seeing a lot of maximalism as well. What I think we're starting to see is actually a mixture of the two, which Aesthetique happens to do. So you'll see super clean walls or super clean palettes, but mixed with a bit of a maximalism within it. And I think what it creates kind of this beautiful balance in design where it's not too far left, it's not too far right. It's a beautiful balance where you're still getting the beautiful experience, but also it's paired with a nice clean lines and kind of clean surfaces that also add to the level of timelessness.
Anamika, maximalism, what does it say about today specifically? Is part of this the fact that we're coming out of COVID and we've all been a little bit starved of sensory stimuli?
Certainly. I think the most important thing to remember is that at the end of the day, we're not unidimensional. As individuals, we care for more than one kind of thing. I could like a space to be minimalistic as well as transition into a space that is maximalistic. So to be able to, I completely agree with Julian in that sense as well. What's happening is that we have a middle point between both spectrums of design, and that's where we're existing right now.
Des, maximalism, what does it say about today and our changing tastes?
Can I just say why I don't think maximalism is the new minimalism? Minimalism, I worked with Terence Conrad for years, and the design company we were modernists coming out of Bauhaus. So I've known ever since I was a kid what minimalism was all about. Now the term maximalism, actually before this talk, I'd hardly heard of it. So it hasn't quite got the legs of minimalism yet. I think, we have produced some maximalist interiors. 14 Hills, we created an English garden, and we actually did a fairly maximalist interior in New York. We created in Hudson Yards a restaurant which was an Englishman's home in New York. However, the next restaurant we're going to do is a very minimalist restaurant. It's going to be the rooftop Birmingham, and it's going to be a beautiful, clean space. And going back, if you like, to our modernist roots, I would say in the last few years, a trend towards restaurants which have got layers and layers of visual imagery has grown, partly because of the way we live now, the way we work. We're all on this Zoom call. I've spent most of my day today in front of a screen, and so when you do that, our working life has become more and more like that. When you go out and you go to restaurants and bars, you want a richer social, more sensory experience, and you get that from maximalist interiors. I don't really want to go. In fact, I'm going out tonight to a restaurant, one of our restaurants. I don't really want to go to something which is really plain and it's a temple of gastronomy and a serious experience. So I think it is very much a development and trend which is of today.
Do you agree with that, Alina? A trend of today?
So I have a different opinion to this. I think we a little bit move over the Kim Kardashian inspired homes, because less is not more when there is a pandemic. We want to be less perfect and more alive. And the minimalist trend that was here for the decades is on its way out and will give way to more layered, collected, eclectic, and vibrant interiors with some touch of originality.
So it's an interesting point, and I didn't expect Kim Kardashian to come up during this conversation, but now that she has, how much of this is driven by social media, the need to create a bold, shareable visual statement? What do you think, Alina?
The social media, I think, is everything and will move forward business even more. So because I think everyone, especially in design and interior design, we saw how many clients come to us just through our Instagram accounts. And it's inevitable. And in the future, it will rise and develop even more. Because we have so many opportunity to see different things, to see the minimalism design, maximalism, what's really appreciated by clients right now, it's originality. It's not about minimalism or maximalism. It's about just being different and pretty much create these trends, not replicate what we all see on Pinterest or Instagram, other social media, but come up with something new. And this is the most hard. And it's really hard to name it maximalism or minimalism. Yeah, I think it's about originality.
Originalism.
Yeah, original. This is what the most precious. Yeah.
We'll just make stuff up as we go.
So, Julian, you work with Alina, of course, and it's interesting to hear her mention the fact that you do get new business now through Instagram, something that would have almost been unimaginable just 5 or 10 years ago. So how important is that social imprint, if we want to call it that? How important is social media in driving maximalism and this bold approach to design?
I'm kind of going to echo what Alina said. I think it's social media is a vehicle now that really it amplifies trends. So what it does is, I think there's two key things in the industry. And since we're talking about social media, I'll stick there, but I'll mention that mass production of certain furniture or designs fill the industry with what the design trend is. So for the last, I would say 10 years, I think one of the biggest things we're seeing is mid-century modern furniture coming out from a lot of manufacturers. And it's like you can't look away without seeing it. So back to social media acts similar to that. Is that we're pumping the industry with certain design styles. And if it's liked more, then certain influencers or certain people want to kind of follow that trend, because obviously it adds value to who they are, more likes, more comments, et cetera, et cetera. One thing about Aesthetique and Alina and myself is that early on in our design business, I think a lot of designers go through this, is you're producing something where people are not 100% like, I agree with it, I love it. But I think what's keen to it, what Alina said to echo that, is it's originality, which is key, because then you start to build a brand. And building a brand is actually more important than just following trends, because then you're chameleonizing yourself within the industry rather than standing out. And with social media, it's very, very key to be bold and stand out, because that's what people are looking for in the long term.
Anamika, then, social media and its role in driving maximalism. What do you think about that?
Honestly, I'm really afraid, because social media is I think it's become a space where there's a lot of junk. And honestly, I would be really afraid to follow a trend just because it is big on social media. However, undeniably, it has incredible impact on the way that people identify with things, or even acknowledge that the trend exists in the first place. one of the most interesting things that we've come about is that now people are picking mood boards from, like Alina said, they're picking up mood boards from Pinterest and Instagram, and they want to replicate it, which again is ridiculous, because you want to be in a space that you can identify with, rather than just because it exists somewhere and you can make a bold statement. So social media as a platform is incredibly scary for the way that people react to it.
Des, that social media moment, I mean, you know as well as I do, a lot of the big openings recently in London, whether it's Big Mama Group or even some of the projects that you mentioned with D&D London, have garnered some of that attention through the fact that they have a very loud visual impact. How important is it to D&D London that you have those Instagram moments, and do you think it drives people actually through the door?
Look, I think you've got to keep Instagram in perspective. Yes, it's, yes, of course, it's quite nice. Oh, let's have some areas of the restaurant, some food which is going to look theatrical, and everyone's going to love it on Instagram. But you've got to be very careful that it has a limited appeal, and it also appeals to a certain crowd. So some of our restaurants, we don't really want to appeal to the Instagram crowd. We've got one restaurant, funnily enough, which completely changes its personality, and from Thursday to Friday, because on Thursday it's 14 Hills. 14 Hills has got a big Instagram following because it's got lovely trees and everything. On Thursdays, all the city guys coming in, and they are really not. They're not so interested in Instagram. On Friday night, we had every young social crowd, a lot of females. Instagram is in the restaurant business, dominated by females coming in, taking pictures, and I sort of blow hot and cold, certainly about restaurants generally. I think for some restaurants, yes, we do say, look, Instagram is powerful. For God's sake, let's do something that gets the restaurant known. But once it's known, I mean, it's a small part of a small but important part of marketing. In terms of the creation of a restaurant, we would never ever create a restaurant based on what people have seen on Pinterest and Instagram. So we create restaurants based on the soul of something which we create as a holistic concept, which is based on what we as restaurateurs and chefs want to create. Now, it's a byproduct how Instagram is just a communication medium. It's not the soul of how you create something. So I do agree that some people just get. I mean, I know the Big Mama guys very well. They are over the top on Instagram, and they are playing it very hard. But that's a minority of people, and the people who are not as clever as them suddenly think, oh yes, I've seen all this big following on Instagram. And they create a restaurant which is based on things other people have done and they've seen on social media, and it ends up being not very successful because it's just lots of other people's ideas and there's no soul or no real purpose to it. So I'm certainly not a believer in I'm talking here as a restaurant owner, not as a restaurant designer. It is not what is driving the creation and concept, either visually or, more importantly, what a restaurant is. I think that's just maybe that's the media thing, but that's not reality for most restaurateurs.
So I want to go back to Julian then, because you touched upon something which is quite interesting about this idea that maximalism doesn't appeal to everyone. And of course, there's lots of different types of design that fall within the boundaries of what maximalism is. Considering that maximalism can be divisive, is there such a thing as good taste or bad taste?
That's a very opinionated response. I think good taste and bad taste really comes in from maybe potentially going against the grain in certain cultural norms, wherever the design sits. Just doing certain things that, again, will start to offend people rather than, I think that's, if we're going to talk about good taste and bad taste, because I think design is beautiful. I mean, we're all here because we love design. I think it's very wrong for me to walk into a space and be like, I hate it. That's my opinion, but in actuality, a designer went in there with their full breath and designed something that they believed that it was beautiful. So I think there's no such thing as good taste and bad taste from a designer standpoint, at least for me. I think I appreciate good design. I appreciate design that I'm maybe not into, because I know how much work it takes to actually produce that type of design. So I'm sorry, that's the best response I could give for that one.
What do you think about that, Alina? Is there such a thing as good or bad taste?
I believe yes, because for me, the purpose of design is to make a person feel, experience emotion, and make you happy. In some way, good design is a healing tool. If space or art make you feel vulnerable, stressed, or even depressed, for me, it's a bad taste in the design. So I think it's all about the emotions.
Well, you guys disagree on a lot. I'm surprised you get anything done, but I guess it's always
it's the yin and yang.
Yeah,
it's actually what makes us stronger as a team, because if we, as Julian once said, if we always agree, so why we need two partners in a team? So,
Anamika, good taste or bad taste? Is there such a thing?
Certainly. I think design has to be evocative. Not offensive, and like Alina said, that if it makes you feel negative emotions, then there's something incorrect about it. However, it's also very subjective. I mean, what's good for me may not be the same for you, Harry. So it does exist, but it's also very subjective. Each one could have an opinion on it.
Des, a good designer once said to me, there's no such thing as bad taste, just a lack of commitment. What do you think about that?
Well, I'd rather answer the question that was first put, is good design or bad design, because there definitely is bad design, which is different from bad taste, because bad design is design that doesn't work. Sometimes, you can produce something that doesn't work. I think taste is a very subjective thing, but and so is there good taste and bad taste? I think from my point of view, yes. People who don't have my taste have generally got bad taste. People who've got my taste, they've got excellent taste. But it's a subjective concept. What I would say, actually, Alina touched on something which I think is which I always say to the designers we work with. The most important thing about designers is not how it looks. Of course, that's an important aspect. The most important thing is how do you feel? How does it make your customers feel? And sometimes people forget that. Even great designers. I went to a Philippe Starck Royal Monceau hotel a while ago, and he'd been allowed to let rip in this hotel with no control at all from his client, who was a big, wealthy Middle Eastern guy. And his public areas were lovely, but I went into the bedrooms, and oh my God, it made me feel so horrible, because it looked like every Philippe Starck idea was there, and it looked great, but it made me feel not quite right. And then sometimes you go into, there was a great designer, David Dalmada, who we worked with, did the Arts Club, and he worked with us on the revamp of Sartoria. And you went into Sartoria when we revamped it, and it wasn't like anything, wow, isn't that incredible? Don't think there was anything in there that really any of the young Instagram generation would have been interested in. Yet you just felt good in it. And it really, and that was, for that crowd, that was way more important than whether or not had snazzy art that you could get 5,000 likes for.
David actually designed the Norman Hotel in Tel Aviv, one of my favorite projects in the world. I want to stick with you, Des, because you talked about Bauhaus, for example, and the origins of minimalism and this idea of utility that plays into minimalism. Is there a risk that maximalism may date more rapidly than a more fundamentally austere or restrained or even inoffensive design?
I think the answer to that is yes. I think especially bad maximalism will date very quickly, because people, because you're taking more risks. If you're putting more stuff in front of people, there's more of an assault on either a feast for the eyes or an assault on visually if people don't like it. So it's a little bit equivalent, I guess, to fusion cooking in food. In fusion cooking, you're putting so many flavors in. It's you absolutely love it, but if you go slightly wrong, it can be a bit of a car crash. So I think the answer to that is probably yes. But I mean, I think we'll have to wait and see. I think people's tastes are changing. And the thing about minimalism, and we've had minimalism coming out of Bauhaus and modernism. It's got a very, very intellectual, it's got an intellectual backbone to that design. And what's happened in maximalism, it's just sort of happened, and it's almost like more democratic. It's come from people just wanting to feel good. Let's chuck it all together. It's like my home. It's not curated, and it's too early to say that it will date. It may just evolve into design being a little bit less studied, a little bit less curated. I mean, so I think it's too early to say. But I certainly think minimalism has got an intellectual robustness, which at the moment maximalism hasn't really got. So that has to evolve.
And Amika, you work, of course, in the editorial world with Living, etc. India. For directional values, is there still room across the industry for light and shade? So where does minimalism still feel appropriate, but how can it evolve to feel timely and not generic or dated?
I think one of the ways that most people are working around it is to ensure that there is a restrained palette to work with at first, so that it allows you to grow from a point zero. Most importantly, I've realized that people are very, very careful again about, and I'm sure this is true not just for residences, but also for commercial spaces like restaurants and design, where you're constantly looking for ways to beat someone's fatigue. And that's where light and shade come into play in the biggest possible way, because you're constantly having to present fresher perspectives, fresher experiences.
Julian, minimalism then, we're all a little bit beyond the generic IKEA-esque interiors. That is starting to feel like something that we've all seen an awful lot of. So if we're saying that there's room for light and shade, there's still room for minimal designs. How do we do minimalism in a way that feels fresh and doesn't feel generic and dated?
I think what's beautiful is actually pulling in a lot of traditionalist forms and mixing those with minimalism, because the forms are something that we look at, especially when we go visit a lot of, like, let's say, old churches or old castles, etc. It's something that's, I don't know, it's something that really, I mean, this is, again, a little bit opinionated, but something that really touches my heart every time I go through like a historical design. So, if, what we love to do actually is like to take this design and minimalize it a little bit, make it super clean, and see exactly how that plays with other design styles as well. So you'll see a lot of our arches, groin ceilings, etc. within our designs that typically you would be like, okay, this is a project that's maybe in Florida, or this is a project that's somewhere else. But again, it adds this level of just, again, it touches on history. And I think that's a way that you could start to kind of play with minimalist design, but start to kind of veer towards kind of a traditionalist approach.
Des, equally then, is there a risk that as hospitality venues rush to be the boldest, it all becomes a bit of a screaming match? Where are the boundaries, and how, if at all, should maximalism be tempered?
Well, I think those boundaries will be really determined by the customers, people who go there. And I mean, there was actually a restaurant which I won't name it because when I was on the judge on this a couple of years ago, it was one of my favorite restaurants visually, and it was absolutely masses of visual. It was a visual feast, and actually it failed, the restaurant, sadly. And I think people just got slightly fed up of too many visual gags in the interior. So you've got to remember that people don't go into restaurants just for, it's not a picture show. People are going there to eat and to socialize and to feel good. I think it's a little bit unfair on to suggest that the restaurants are, we're all just trying to go for more and more daring interiors. I don't really think that is. Maybe it's the designs you're looking at, Harry, for your awards that are doing that. But I don't think that is the case. Actually, we ourselves are quite keen. We've done we had the German Gymnasium, which is actually quite a minimalist in some ways, minimalist design, that incredible incredible building. I'm very keen for us to do a classic minimalist interior as our next project, and I actually think that's going to, people are going to be very, very interested, because it's just a wow space because of the fact that it's pared back, and there are a few visual things, and you're concentrating on the space rather than say in some of our restaurants where you've got lots of art everywhere. And I think ultimately the our business is a business where you are being told every day whether your design or whether your food is working or not, and our customers will give us a very clear steer as if we're going in the wrong direction.
And Amika, I feel like Des just fired a shot across our bows as design journalists. Is this really something that we're seeing out in the market, or is it simply something that the design press awards are choosing to focus on, choosing to look at more, because perhaps it's more interesting than years of more restrained design?
As a trend, it definitely draws more attention, and you have to realize we live in a time when if it's not sensational, or if it doesn't make your jaw drop, most people feel that it's lacking in some form or the other. So I think that's something that, as people from the editorial space, we get excited about. However, I do remember having a conversation with Timothy Corrigan, who's known to design really maximalist spaces. So you'll find draperies with feathers on it in the kind of spaces that and it'll be placed next to mosaics from stitches and all sorts of really dramatic elements in his design. And I remember asking him how, if at all, do people continue to live there after the first 3 months go by? Because you're going to get tired of this, right? You're going to get tired of the fact that it's precious, but it's not necessarily homey or comfortable. So how do you really work against that? And he said something really interesting. He said that typically it's about pulling back the layers as you go around, as opposed to adding layers. And that's one thing where I think that's one place in which design really continues to stay relevant. And honestly, we are just greedy people. We just want to keep seeing new things. So you put it in front of us, and it excites us, and we'll push it forward.
Alina, you're joining us today from New York, and Amika, of course, is joining us from Mumbai. Des and I are in the UK. Julian, you're where exactly?
I'm in New York as well.
In New York as well. So the question I have for you, Alina, is this a global trend, a global movement? Is this something that we're really seeing replicated everywhere? Or is it something that we're seeing isolated to certain urban locations, for example, or certain countries more broadly?
I personally believe it's a global trend or movement, because as humans, we're being in all of this together. So we went through pandemic, we experienced this digital hectic time altogether, and the world kind of, in a design perspective, became more united. It's not like the USA design or British design or like European design. It's more, we're talking about some kind of design that unite all of us.
What do you think, Julian? Global trend?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a global trend. I think that people are being a little bit more daring nowadays. They're trying to layer design a lot of the time, and I also think that there's certain designers in the industry that are kind of pioneering. I wouldn't say pioneering, but really pushing the trend. I would say Kelly Wearstler, some of her designs are very maximalist, but she's able to switch it off and on when she wants. Demore Studio from Italy, they're able to switch it on and off as well. So I think there's certain maximalist designs that are tastefully done that are super nice, but then there's kind of like what Des says, if it's not my taste, it's not good taste. But there's a lot of maximalist design that I don't like, but I think that there's some that's actually really well done. And so I think it's a global trend, and I think there's going to be more pioneers that are going to come in and push the trend even further.
Anamika, I don't mean to play into stereotype, but whenever I think of Indian design and India as a design market, I imagine it as being already pretty maximalist. Am I correct in thinking that? And if so, what does a maximalist trend mean in somewhere like India?
Very honestly, Harry, the urban population largely gravitates towards minimalism. We care about, and like I said earlier, we care about having spaces that are comfortable rather than precious. Um, Not to say that maximalism doesn't exist; it exists. Actually, it's growing exponentially even now as we speak in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, where projects that are equivalent to multi-million pounds are executed on a quarterly basis, and they are full of, they're completely layered with textures and patterns and all sorts of colors. In my opinion, it's a little bit of a overkill. I don't think I don't think that the identity of the country per se cannot be rolled into just one or the other way. When you look at India, you have to think of India as you would Europe, where each state in India has its own. Just like Europe has its countries, India has its states, and each state has its own identity, culture, language, staple diet. So you can't really define it by just either maximalism or minimalism. It's just that where homes are smaller, people prefer minimalism, and where you have no limit to the square footage you have handy, they just go all out.
Des, you touched upon the different audiences that sometimes appear at different restaurant venues. Should restaurant and bar designs try to be all things to all people, or does directional bolder design indicate more of an emphasis today on cultural tribes?
I think with when you're designing a restaurant, coming up with a concept, it's important to just focus on what you're trying to do on the concept, not say, well, I want to appeal to that crowd. And then what happens? And we actually consciously do not do that. We consciously don't want to do that. So our latest project is in Stratford in East London. It opened a couple of weeks ago. It's a 15,000 square foot project, and we took this building and we were inspired by the actual building and because it was all wood and glass, created by Acme. Beautiful building. I'm sure it's going to win awards. We decided to create a concept which was like being in a ski chalet, and we did alpine food. Now, we're not building it for, there certainly have been people wandering around Stratford looking as if they were longing to eat alpine food. We have created that concept, hoping that that concept would appeal to, enough people to fill the restaurant. The same with German Gymnasium. When we launched the German Gymnasium, the journalist thought we were completely nuts, taking a building, turning it into a restaurant and calling it a gymnasium, and actually calling it the German Gymnasium, and then serving German food. I mean, if you started off with saying, I want to appeal to a certain cultural tribe, you would not be saying, I'll open a restaurant serving German food and call it a gymnasium. So we're completely the reverse. What we do is we try to come up with a concept. We quite like to have a wide variety of people, whether all ages, all sorts of cultural tribes, if you like, that come. The one thing I would say is, though, and I found this in the projects, we're working on a couple of projects in the US at the moment, when we talk to US developers, they see some of the things that's in our design, which are British and European style, and they are very keen that we have those, oh yes, so you're doing the cocktails that way, oh, well, that's very British, or you do this, that art's very British. So they like to see some of what we are represented in the designs we create, although it's more a reflection of us rather than us somehow trying to appeal to a cultural tribe that like that sort of aesthetic or that sort of, food or drinks trend.
Alina, what do you think about this idea of cultural tribes and a restaurant design needing to be all things to all people?
As I said in the beginning, I think the originality will be more important than ever. And I still believe that clients in hospitality will increasingly search out one-of-a-kind interiors from the designers. It's like based on their cultural background, by their design style, by their vision. There will always be a market of people who want something that is not seen everywhere and that is not available to everyone. Like, I actually noted that in the last number of years, we've seen an expansion of creative people working at a small scale, doing really beautiful one-off work that looks so different, because they're exploring their like cultural background, they're exploring their like vision, their dreams, and their passions. And I believe that kind of craftsmanship and design will become even more prized.
Julian, I'm going to get to a nuts and bolts side of all of this, which is that maximalism arguably requires a skilled design hand. Does it always require a big budget?
That's a great question. So I'll shed some context here. So we actually consulted with a real estate tech startup to find distressed properties throughout the States and scale their design by finding all the holes in design and why it takes so long to get to a finalized design. And we had to do that with limited resources, make it super quick, so on and so forth. And through that process, we've learned a lot about sourcing, finding cost-effective products, high impact, low cost, etc. And so to quickly answer the question, no, it doesn't require a big budget. But what it does require, it really requires attention to the detail, because I think it's very easy to throw everything into a room and it starts to look like my grandma's place. Or you could really fine tune everything where it's like, again, it's a crafted design. And what maximalism reminds me of, I think overall, it's like, again, when you go through these old castles and each room is delicately designed. I mean, wallpaper, ceilings, ornaments. There's so much design, but when you step into it, it's a complete story. There's a complete package. It's somewhat maximalist in its design, but we call it traditionalist, but it's really maximalist if you really look at it. Different pieces of art. It's a lot of things going on, but it's tastefully done. And I think what's beautiful about that is that when you look at design like that, you realize that they spent 5 years, 10 years crafting a single room. And they took time, because back then in the day, we had time. Nowadays, we don't have time. So I think it kind of showcases what design is for today, that really design is a vehicle. Design has now become a business in itself. And to create a business out of this, you need to do things very, very quickly. And so coming up with maximalist design does not require a big budget, especially if you have proper resources to get to that point.
Well, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask each of you the same question that we're asking every person that we've done a roundtable with over the course of Restaurant and Bar Design Week, and that is, why do we need restaurants and bars? Let's start with Danamika.
So that bad cooks like me can still be fed.
Alina, why do we need restaurants and bars?
So I think the main function of restaurants and bars as a site of social exchange. Consuming food and drinks alongside other people makes us think about what we share, taste and space, customs and attitudes, and makes us realize we have much more in common as actually we thought.
Des, why do we need restaurants and bars?
I think especially in the working from home, post-COVID lives, we're all starting to lead. I mean, we're going to go back to a little bit to the norm, but there are some changes forever. I think increasingly, restaurants are not just about food; they are a social place. Restaurants and bars and cafes are where people go to meet each other. And the city centres are really going to be redefined. London is now being redefined as we speak, very, very rapidly, I think, to reflect really not just offices and so on, where people go to do functional stuff, is where people go to meet and be entertained and so on. And I think the restaurants are going to play a much, much more crucial role in the social fabric of not just UK, but New York. We're in New York as well. I mean, New York is an incredible place. Same thing is happening there. So I think we're just going to be a much, much more integral part of life in the future because of the way that we're choosing to work.
And Julian, why do we need restaurants and bars?
I think it's as simple as it's a positive reprieve. It's really somewhat of an oasis. I think nowadays more than ever with social media, it's kind of pinning us against the wall and saying, this is how you should look. This is how much money you should make. This is what you need to do, so on and so forth. So I think it's a nice break from all of that. It's like, get off of social media, push all the digital things around you aside, and spend time socializing, eating amazing food, having an amazing experience with the people that you like. And I think it's actually something that's necessary in all of our lives, to take some time out of the monotony and really spend some time spending time with our friends and enjoying our lives, because that's why we're here, right?
Well, a huge thank you to our speakers, and I want to remind those listening that there are more talks on the website at www.restaurantandbardesignAwards.com. And if you want to ignore Julian's advice and get back on Instagram, you can find more on Instagram from us at Restaurant and Bar Design Awards. From me at Harry McKinley, from Living Etc. India at Living Etc. IND, from D&D London at D&D London, and Aesthetique at Aesthetique Group. But for now, thanks for listening.